Hi, this is Professor Rogers, and welcome to my communications neighborhood. So today what I want to talk about is something that we've been discussing a lot in my classes recently at Fordham, which is the concept of story building. So story building is really important for multiple things that come up through the interview process, starting with your elevator pitch. So your elevator pitch is something that you're probably going to start using before you ever even walk into the first interview room. Your elevator pitch is going to be based on, a subset of your past, not everything from your past, but a subset of your past. But specifically, we're going to link 2, 3, possibly 4 things together in a relatively rapid way to show who you are, why you're here, what you're up to, where you want to go, etc. The basics of your elevator pitch. And when we're doing that, we're not just looking sort of factually, did this, did that, did the other. Oftentimes what we want to do is we want to pull interesting stories into it, which kind of help bring those experiences to life. And so already from the perspective of building your elevator pitch, we're going to start to use stories. Looking more at your resume and thinking about the interview, what we want to do is we want to think about how those stories can really bring to life the skills you want to make sure you highlight to the employer by the time you leave the room. So what I recommend for most people, again, back to the 3x3 concept, is 3 things. So 3 skills that you want to make sure by the time you leave, the employer knows you have these things. My students at Fordham, they're all quantitative finance students. So typically what they want to do is they want to leave a strong knowledge of quantitative skills, math skills, a strong understanding of computer languages, programming skills, and 3, something along the lines of communication skills, leadership skills, teamwork skills, something like that, something more in the interpersonal area. So for all of the stories that they're going to look back through their resume and start building, they're going to do it with the perspective of using those stories to highlight one of those skills. So what my students will do then is they'll go back into their past and they'll look at, for example, their undergraduate experience. And they'll say, okay, what did they do? What was their major? Were they in any groups? Were they the president of an association? Did they have any really interesting projects that they worked on with one of their professors? And now what I want them to do is develop a story that makes that interesting. So tell me about the competition. Tell me about leading the group. Tell me about an interesting event that your group organized or an interesting speaker you had and what you learned from that speaker. Tell me about a project that you may have worked on and why that project was important. Did it solve a certain problem? Is someone still using your solution today or your creation? Come up with something interesting about that background that really makes it stand out and really makes it work. Come up with something really unique and interesting about that background that really makes it interesting, that really makes it pop. So the next thing you want to do is you want to think about how those stories can be crafted to sound interesting to the person you're talking to. So for example, I had a student the other day who was talking about his background, and it was at a software company, and he said, oh, this is really boring stuff. This was like some boring project I worked on, and and when I finished, they ended up changing this other one and started using this one, but it was just a lot of tedious work. And I said, all right, let's step back and let's look at it a little bit differently. Why was the project necessary? What was going on? And so we started explaining how at this company there was a certain delay that the developers faced. Whenever they developed a certain project, they always had to wait 4 or 5 hours before it could be processed. So he came up with a program that eliminated that wait altogether. So it eliminated 100% of the wait. So what it ended up showing was that not so much his work on it that was interesting. In fact, he said it was really boring. But what it solved, if you understood the story behind why that was even on there in the first place on his resume, you understood that there was something really meaningful here. There was a big problem the company had. So what I recommended to this student was that he really look at the story from the perspective of the problem it solved. So start talking about the company a little bit, what they were doing, what the history of the company was briefly, and how that tied into the problem that the developers had. And then that problem then was causing problems. Like what kind of problems? Well, monetary problems. It was costing money. 4 hours of delay time. How much did that cost? It was probably costing some other sort of annoyance problems, like with customers. Maybe customers weren't getting serviced as fast as they wanted. There's a lot of drama that you could build in the beginning of that story before you get to the part about how you were asked to come in, write a really interesting, clever program that solved this issue, which he did, and then implement it into the company, and it's still used today. So this was a great example of how a student can take something from his resume that seems pretty boring, seems innocuous, doesn't even seem like it's that important necessarily, but turn it into a really dynamic, really interesting story that shows how you used your computer programming skills, how he used his quant skills to design some sort of algorithm. So it ended up being really, really valuable for him when in the beginning he thought it was just a meaningless bullet point. Remember, if you've got a bullet point on your resume, there must be something important about it. If it's occupying that really important real estate, why? Why is it there? What's the story behind it? What's the really interesting story? People remember interesting stories. That's what's going to make you memorable. That's what's going to help you stand out. Come up with good stories. More about that next time.